Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. If you're joining us on Facebook, it's great to see you here. I'm Alison from Stop Sizewell C. So the reason we're here is that yesterday EDF submitted its Sizewell C application for a development consent order, which you'll hear us probably refer to as the DCO. This wasn't a surprise, and it's also not a surprise if we feel a bit low, as although this wasn't what we wanted to happen, we knew it was coming. So we wanted to share some information about what this means. More importantly, to say emphatically, this is not the end. We will fight on. The project is by no means a done deal, as we will explain in the next few minutes. So I'm joined by Paul and Charles. Paul is going to start with a brief overview of what happens next, and then Charles will share some important messages about all the reasons Sizewell C may still not go ahead, and I'll wrap up with some of the many things that you can do to help us fight back. We'll try and keep these presentations quite brief, and if you've got questions, please write them in the comments section below this video on Facebook, and we'll answer as many as we can on the video and the rest in writing. So over to you, Paul.
Hi. I'm Paul, the Chair of Sizewell C and the Secretary of the Minsmere Level Stakeholder Group. The Planning Inspectorate now has 28 days to accept or reject EDF's application from the day it was submitted. Their decision will in part rest on the adequacy of EDF's consultations. We're calling on the Inspectorate not to accept it, and we have an online action on our webpage which you can tell the Planning Inspector why you think EDF has not properly consulted you and ask them to reject it. You can send that message now, and we'd like it if you could personalise it with your own opinions. Assuming the application is accepted by the Planning Inspectorate, we will be able to see EDF's application for the first time, and it'll probably be around 50,000 pages and a lot of maps and drawings and various other pieces of information. It will be online and should be viewable in libraries, of course, only if libraries were open. Normally at this point, EDF would start the public consultations or pre-examination, and has suggested that the period for registering as an interested party would be extended to 12 weeks, ending perhaps in mid-September. However, the County Council and District Council say they think EDF should halt the process after the acceptance is made and not start at all, given that the ongoing restrictions and our inability to hold public meetings. 58 town and parish councils have just written to the county and district councils to urge them to stand firm on this point. If they succeed, we will have sight of the DCO proposals, but the clock will not be ticking on the rest of the process. We will, of course, share information about what is in the proposals as soon as we see them, but you may want to start thinking about what your main issues are, as when the time comes, we will be encouraging all of you to prepare a short statement called the relevant representation so you can take part in the examination. Normally, there will be about 5 months after the DCO is submitted until the public examination starts. But we hope this time the period will be much longer. Unless social distancing restrictions are lifted, it will be very difficult, if not impossible, to fully participate in the examination process. And the Planning Inspectorate has not yet made a decision on how it could work, or indeed whether it can work. The examination stage or phase will take about 6 months, and this will be the time when we will marshal all our arguments about the unsuitability of the project for this sensitive area. After that period, the Planning Inspectorate has 3 months to decide what to recommend to the government about EDF's development application for Sizewell C, and then the Secretary of State, currently Alex Sharma, would have a further 3 months to make a final decision. Given the uncertainty about whether the process will pause or not, as has happened already with the Scottish Power, a decision might be expected by the end of October or November 2021. But given that the decision on Wilfer has now been postponed by the Secretary of State twice, predicting the decision date is nigh on impossible. That's all I have to say at the moment. So over to you, Charles.
Sorry, muted for a moment there. Hi, I'm Charles. I'm also on Stop Sizewell C, and I chair the B1122 Action Group. So it was really interesting seeing EDF's pitch yesterday on the various media, and they essentially had two angles that they felt why Sizewell C should be built, and both of them don't stand up to scrutiny. That they were essentially helping the economy bounce back from coronavirus and climate change. So let's look at those quickly. Bouncing back from coronavirus, well, their expenditure is going to be very slow. As Paul's just pointed out, it's going to be ages before they can actually start doing anything, 2 to 3 years at best. And they're not, they don't have a great record for doing things quickly if you've been following Hinkley or any of the other power stations they've been building. So the money is not going to even start to be spent for 3 years, and the peak won't be for another 5. So, you know, if you want to get the economy moving quickly, this isn't the way to do it. Here in East Suffolk, tourism, as we all know, is a very important business and employs a lot of people, or at least it did up until coronavirus came along. That's an area that's going to need help getting going again, and it's going to be an area that's going to be really hit by EDF building a new power station. All the traffic on the roads, the effect it's going to have on local accommodation. The whole of the local tourist industry is pretty much united against EDF and against Sizewell C. So a new power station isn't going to help them. So let's look at this great lump of money that EDF are going to chuck into the economy and get us all working again. Well, the way they're going to get this is to take it from us in the first place, because they want to raise the money from a tax or a levy on everybody's electricity bills. So they're going to take it out of the economy before they're going to start spending it on all of our electricity bills. And when they come to spend it, they've said, oh, by the way, 2/3 of this money will actually stay in the UK and be spent in the UK. In other words, 1/3 is well and gone over to France and China and elsewhere. So if you want to stimulate economy, taking money out of it and then not putting it back in would seem to me to be a pretty silly way of doing it. So it doesn't stack up on bouncing back the economy from coronavirus in so many ways. And then they say, well, what about climate change? You know, it's going to help us turn the corner in CO2 emissions. Well, there's lots of people queuing up now to say that renewables and storage of electricity is capable of taking up the slack, and it can do it cheaper and it can do it faster than nuclear power can. As we've already said, even on EDF's best figures, and you know, they're going up to 10 years, they're running up to 10 years late on some of their new power stations, but even on their best figures, it's going to be 14 probably years at least until that power station is generating electricity. And in the meantime, it's going to churn out a lot of CO2 in casting all the concrete and all the traffic and so forth. So it's going to create a lot of CO2, and it's going to be well into the second decade before it's beginning to make a difference. By which time, most commentators reckon that it's going to be too late. So getting renewable energy up and running, wind farms, solar farms, and the storage for it is going to be much faster, and it's going to make the difference faster to CO2. And it's not just the renewable industry and people like us who are saying this. The very important Committee on Climate Change, chaired by John Gummer, Lord Gummer, former MP of this parish, and now one of the top people in the country in terms of the politics of environment, and the National Infrastructure Commission have both said that if we don't get more nuclear, it's okay because the renewables can crack it. So with those two features, those two heavyweights behind them, and a lot of other international opinion, the nuclear pitch for climate change just doesn't stack up. But finally, I'd say we need to look at the money side of it. In monetary terms, all EDF's new nuclear power stations have gone over time, and all of them have spent a cost way more than they were originally going to. Now, I can see a time where they might get halfway through it and realize that they've run out of money, and we would be left with a useless lump of concrete that has happened in other countries where where nuclear electricity generators have gone bust. So that's a quick whistle stop through the issues. I hope you found it useful. And now over to Ali.
Thanks, Charles. And obviously, you know, it's a really interesting time for EDF to submit its Sizewell C application, not only coronavirus restrictions, but a raging political row about China's involvement in our critical infrastructure. And actually, you know, questions about the flexibility of nuclear and how it works with our future energy requirements, given that the Sizewell B nuclear power station is currently running at about 50% capacity. So much of what Charles said, these and many of our other arguments in our case against Sizewell C can be found on our website. If you've been supporting us for a long time, you'll be very familiar with our views on transport, workers' accommodation, environmental impacts, all of those issues. But if you're quite new to this campaign, then I do encourage you to go to our website, stopsizewellc.org, and take a look. There's a lot of material there. So how can we fight back? The most important thing we need to do right at this moment is call on the Planning Inspectorate to reject EDF's application based on what our neighbouring MP, Dr. Dan Poulter, has called their disdainful consultations. So via the Take Action link on our website, our friends at the campaign group Some of Us have helped us create a pre-prepared email to all the necessary people that's ready for you to personalise. Now, Paul did mention this, I just wanted to repeat it because it is the most important thing you can do at this time. Whatever we may think to the contrary, submitting the Sizewell C application during a coronavirus pandemic is actually not a reason for the Planning Inspectorate to reject their application. But in this action that you'll find on our website, we have provided some reasons you can use. And we do actively encourage you to personalise it with your own reasons, because it will have a lot more impact if it's coming from you, from your heart. What has your experience of the last 8 years, yes, really 8 years of consultation been? If you've already taken that action, but you can think of a few more things you might want to say, especially given what we now know about, you know, EDF's case for Sizewell C, then just send the action again. There's no limit to the number of times you can write to the Planning Inspectorate. The second thing, and this is also really important, and again, it's something Paul referred to, is to send a message to the county and district council leaders, urging them to do everything they possibly can to tell EDF not to allow the public consultation period on this application to start until coronavirus restrictions are lifted. That means until we can meet, till our town and parish councils can meet, until we can view the proposals offline, go to the library, whatever we need to do. So details of how to write to Matthew Hicks and Steve Gallant, those council leaders, are also on the Take Action link on the website. The third thing I want to urge everyone to do is to help us spread the word and build support. There was a lot of media coverage yesterday, and you can see some examples on our website. And it's absolutely fantastic, for example, that the RSPB, Suffolk Wildlife Trust and the National Trust are now opposing Sizewell C very openly. But we mustn't assume that that's a game changer. So one of the unions said yesterday in the media that those who oppose Sizewell C are a tiny minority. So let's show them that we're not. It was great on the Today programme yesterday morning to hear Nick Butler say that the Sizewell protest movement was very strong and was going to have a significant impact on the inquiry that was starting. So please, let's all work together to grow this movement. We post regular updates daily on Facebook, Twitter, we're on Instagram and LinkedIn. So please share our posts. Actually, sharing is more helpful than liking, although we love it when you like them too, because it helps get the message out. And if you get our email updates, please forward them to friends and family. If you don't get these emails, you can sign up via our website on the join link. Another way to help us raise awareness is to write letters to local and national newspapers in response to any news articles that you see. We're always happy to help this, so do get in touch if you'd like to write some letters, but it's great if there's letters coming from a wide range of people, so we'd love you to get involved. Many of you have given very generous donations to Stop Sizewell C's campaign, and we are grateful to you all. If you haven't given, and you can do so, there's an orange button on our website and you can give by that means. We will never be able to match EDF's army of lawyers and lobbyists, but we like to think that, you know, we're strategic and, you know, we've got the support of the community, and with your help we can do a great deal more. Thank you very, very much for all your support. So I think that's probably it for the presentations. I'm just going to see if we've got any questions on our website. I can see straight away that somebody called Jill has said, could you provide a link to your website, please? So yeah, I've said this and I'll say it repeatedly again because it's the most important thing you can do after this is go there. It's stopsizewellc, all one word, .org, O-R-G. I have a question here from someone called Tracy in Saxmundham, and I'm going to direct this at Charles, I think. What impact do you think COVID will have on the chances of Sizewell C going ahead long term?
Yeah, thanks for that, Tracy. I mean, I hope I covered some of this already, but I can't see in net effect, it's not going to be positive for EDF. It's inevitably slowing them down. They've had to slow down the build at Hinckley, and their processes are inevitably going to be slowed down. But the idea, you know, COVID-19 is going to be around for a long time, certainly until they get a vaccine. And the idea of workers coming from around the country, which is inevitable because we can't provide all the workers from this local area, is quite scary. So I think that's certainly one area, full picture. It's really not the energy industry heavily because they are not making money like they were. EDF in particular was already had big financial problems, and COVID-19's made that even worse. So that in turn will have an effect. So I think, generally speaking, I think it hasn't helped. Well, every cloud has a silver lining, as they say.
Thank you. I've had a couple of messages by email, obviously, from people who we're already in touch with. Gavin in Woodbridge is saying, I saw a report in The Independent about the risk of Sizewell C becoming an island. Is that a possible deal breaker? Paul, I'm going to ask you to take that.
The whole issue of sea level change and also the low-lying land that's all around Sizewell do present a very difficult problem for EDF to solve. We don't just have sea level rise here, we also have the situation where the land is actually slowly sinking, and that's all goes back to the previous ice age, as the pressure has been let off Scotland, unfortunately. So they have got to do quite a lot of work to make this what is still already, I should say, a small site be protected properly from the sea. The other issue is that if it becomes an island, one of the entrances to the nuclear site will be underwater at Sizewell Gap, and this is one of the other issues. All of nuclear sites are supposed to have two entrances. It's one of the reasons why a proposal for a new entrance into the Sizewell C site is going to cross the triple SI and potentially do so much damage to the hydrology of the area. So in terms of it becoming an island, in terms of access to the site where nuclear waste is going to be stored until at least 2135, according to the government information, yes, it's a really big issue, and it's not something which is going to be easily answered when it comes to satisfying the Office for Nuclear Regulation and the Planning Inspectorate.
Thank you. Ruth on Facebook is asking, what kind of things can people from outside the area do to help? Thank you very much, Ruth. Well, there's nothing to stop you sending the message to the Planning Inspectorate calling for the application to be rejected. I mean, we do encourage people to personalise those emails, but there's plenty of suggestions of things that you can say already written. So if you want to do that, then that would be very welcome. Elsewhere on our website, there's a link called What You Can Do, which is subtly different from Take Action. It's got a sort of range of broader things that we encourage people to do. I was just about to update that page with email addresses for ministers who are responsible for policy. Any messages saying that you don't think Suffolk is the right place for a project of this kind would be very welcome. It's also possible to write to your own MP expressing concern about issues like China's involvement in our infrastructure at a time when they're cracking down on Hong Kong, and you know, there's a lot of political bad will at the present time. So if you know and love the area and can write letters talking about that affection for East Suffolk to your local newspaper or national newspapers, that's very welcome too. Even if you don't know the area and you just think this is a bad idea, then letters to your MP and to ministers would be brilliant. Thank you very much. I've got one more from Trevor, who has a question also about what's happening with China's involvement and how that will affect Sizewell. I can just briefly say, obviously we know that the Prime Minister has got a strategy for disentangling the UK from the contract with Huawei, and you may have seen in today's Telegraph that the former Conservative leader Ian Duncan-Smith is calling on the Prime Minister to do the same for China General Nuclear, saying it's the next hub Huawei. This will have very major implications for the proposed nuclear plant at Bradwell in Essex, which was going to be majority owned and led by China General Nuclear. China General Nuclear is obviously a minority partner here at Suffolk, and I think that, you know, their future involvement will really depend on whether government's prepared to approve this new funding model that Charles talked about. Because if that's the case, then they may be able to attract other investors and China's investment may not be very significant. But if they don't get that model, then I think the chances of Sizewell going ahead are pretty slim altogether. I don't know whether either of you would like to add anything to that.
Just very briefly, I heard today that Hinckley has already got something in the region of 150 to 200 Chinese nationals as part of CGN's workforce there. And it does throw up a lot of security issues long term, because you know, I'm not suggesting that, you know, China would kind of be able to throw a master switch once Sizewell's up and running, but it does give them a big hammer even halfway through the build if they suddenly threaten to pull their funding if we don't stop talking about, for example, Hong Kong or other global issues. So you know, it is a real concern, and it's great that Ian Duncan-Smith has noticed that that Sizewell is all part of this involvement of major Chinese companies in our country.
We've got a question from Paul on Facebook saying, is there a role for a petition to stop Sizewell C? I can just quickly say that there's a very big petition against the regulated asset-based model, which is the nuclear tax, which some of us helped us with. Our friends Together Against Sizewell C have an online petition, I believe. We'll talk to them about possibly a new one. I think now that the application's in and there's been all the press coverage and more national awareness of the issue, then a petition might well be worthwhile. But, you know, we felt that there were other sort of ways of raising awareness before this point. We've got quite a lot of questions coming, guys, so hold on to your hats. Fiona saying the union support, can we expand on this, please? Obviously, jobs will become a big issue in the not too distant future. Charles, would you like to go back to that point?
Yeah, just sorry, I'm muting myself again. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. I think the unions take a very simple view about these things, that you know, money spent equals jobs, and jobs is a good thing, and you can see where they're coming from. I don't know whether, and it's an interesting thought as to whether engaging with the unions would be a positive thing to do. Of course, most of the unions are in those old industries like construction and engineering, and they're less strong in sectors like tourism. So, you know, you can see where they might be coming from in those regards. And it's an interesting point, that whether we can perhaps engage with them. But I think that the whole jobs agenda is quite a deceptive one. The vast majority of the jobs that be created will be for a relatively short time. The whole bill takes 10 years, but very few people will be employed over that whole period. Hinckley are already laying people off. You know, they've got to the halfway stage and they're laying people off now, you know, which is pretty uncomfortable for them in the current situation. So the jobs are a bit of a flash in the pan. And here locally in Suffolk, you know, there's good evidence to show that anything serious or well paid is going to be people who've already been working on Hinckley and going to be imported in. So from a jobs and economy point of view, we here in East Suffolk don't really benefit that much.
Thank you. Claire on Facebook says about sea level rise. At the first public consultation exhibition, I was told the cost of raising the road would be a drop in the ocean. Paul, do you want to say anything more about that?
If you're thinking about the road that currently goes into B, you're probably right. It would be something that they could put a bridge in or something else, although that valley is fairly low-lying all the way up. So it's not clear actually how they would go about doing that. So yes, you're quite right. It wouldn't cost them a lot of money, but I mean, you end up with what is essentially a nuclear island with 3 old nuclear power stations on it, all of the waste and high-level spent fuel from Sizewell B, and 2 more reactors worth in Sizewell C, sitting on that island with advancing sea level rise, storms making much more headway and being much more violent and more frequent. So in the end, it's not just the access, it's actually keeping the thing safe over what is effectively a century and more, probably a century and a half. And that's an awful long time in any sort of construction land. There are very few buildings that we're building today that have lasted 50 years, never mind 150 years plus. So it's a big challenge for them.
Well, just the writer might have been thinking of the new causeway, and obviously there are big issues around the hydrology and so on.
Yeah, I mean that's also true, and this does depend on what is in the development consent order. EDF have been pushing for a causeway across from basically the construction site and as the alternative entrance to Sizewell C. This is basically an earth bank with a hole in the middle that allows water to go in and out. Unfortunately, if they continue with that, this is sitting on a very deep peat deposit, which isn't very stable. And as sea level rises and starts lapping up against this, the chances for this to start being eroded and collapsed. And you can't easily actually protect it, because if you put rock armor, which is a common way of protecting these things, funnily enough, it all just sort of sinks into the peat. So there's quite a big issue there. In fact, both the councils and the Environment Agency and others are saying it should be a bridge, because at least the water can go underneath it and it doesn't suffer from those things. But until we see that, until we see what's actually proposed, we don't know how we can actually deal with that, and how whether it would last the time.
And I should just add that the independent article we referred to earlier was based on a report by Aldeburgh-based consultant engineer Nick Scarr, and his report is on our website, stopsizewellsea.org, if you'd like to have a look. We have a few more questions. Deborah Sweet is saying, what other nuclear energy options are realistically available for government to consider, and should not they be focused on? Or should the government not be focused on those? Paul, do you want to take that? I'm happy to if you don't wish to.
I mean, there's a lot of discussion about small modular reactors now as well, which is a technology that comes from Rolls-Royce. Well, amongst others, Rolls-Royce is perhaps the lead contender in this country, and the government has put money into the development of these devices. Rolls-Royce makes nuclear power plants that go in submarines, so they have a fairly long history in developing and using these things. They're much quicker to build, they're much smaller, much less costly. They don't generate quite as much power as a Hinkley Point or a Sizewell C would do, but as a combination where you put 2 or 3 of these things down, very quickly you can reach a similar sort of power output to what a Sizewell C would actually generate. So that's an alternative. The government is also putting in money into fusion, which, to be honest, has been going for an awful long time, but they seem to be getting closer to something there. But there are other alternatives. Battery storage, various hydraulic means of storage for wind power, the idea that actually wind farms can generate hydrogen direct and then use hydrogen as a carbon-free source, which it is. When you burn hydrogen, it produces water. It's fairly easy. So there are other alternatives. It's not just nuclear alternatives. There are other alternatives in the current mix that we can continue to use and develop. And that's even before you get to things like seaborne things like barrages and wave power, which are working very well up in Scotland, incidentally, the wave power. So there are alternatives.
And the other nuclear sites in the UK, the Moorside project in Cumbria does really seem to be sort of completely off the table because of the bankrupt nature of the consortium. But as Paul mentioned, the Wolver project in Anglesey they're seeking development consent, and that decision's already been delayed 6 months, and it's just been delayed for another 6 months. So that's now due at the end of September. You know, we've always heard EDF say it was the best site in the country, but, you know, it doesn't belong to them. So we just have to deal with the one that is here. I have a question from Fran, who says, has the carbon footprint of the build, including transport, been calculated? Briefly, Fran, in its application for Hinkley Point, EDF said they'd calculated that the carbon footprint of that project would be less than 5 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. We've not been able to get hold of a copy of the study on which that figure is based, and friends in Hinkley have been asking for it, and we've been asking via EDF contacts here for it, without success at the moment. They will have to publish a sustainability statement as part of this application for Sizewell C, so we'll be looking with great interest, assuming the planning inspector accepts the application, to see what they say on that particular topic. There are many conflicting studies about what the carbon footprint of nuclear is, and Ben Sovercool and Keith Barnum are 2 people in particular who've calculated it to be more in the 40 to 60 grams per kilowatt hour range. All the officials at the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy will say on the topic is that it's contentious. So let's see what they say.
Just one other point in that discussion is nobody is really sure how much carbon equivalent there is for actually dealing with the spent nuclear fuel. I mean, yes, they've made estimates of this, but nobody's ever done it really. So, you know, the closest people to doing this are the Finns with their depository at Olkiluoto, sorry. But other than that, nobody's really sure what that actually takes over the period of time that it's going to have to be stored and to some extent monitored. So it is a contentious issue for all sorts of reasons.
Graham Lacey, great work team, he says. Thank you very much, Graham. Should the reference to RAB be strongly referred to in any communications given the current economic situation? I'm going to give that to you, Charles.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the government in the autumn said they did a consultation on the RAB, which is this nuclear tax to cut a long story short, but it was fairly lightweight to the extent that it didn't actually have any numbers in it. So we don't really know how much money they would want to take from everybody in order to fund the project. There's a lot of detail and so on, and there's more to the point, there's investors in the middle, and that could be another Achilles heel for them, in as much as the money doesn't go straight to Sizewell, it goes to pay off the investors who've stumped up the money to build it. And of course, nuclear is not a sexy place to put your money at the moment, and it's certainly not it would not seem to be one that you could call risk-free. It's going to need the government to make all sorts of enormous guarantees to these investors before they're going to put their hands in the pockets. So short answer, yes, it's definitely an important area. And as the details start to emerge of what the RAB might look like, so it's definitely an area we're going to be campaigning on.
Thank you. So yes, please do refer to it in all your communications. Then I've had a question by email from Michael in Darsham. Will the early release of trained or skilled workers influence both the timing of from Hinkley Point, influence both the timing of Sizewell's pre-build and the number of local staff employed? I mean, I think clearly EDF have been pushing on with the application because they want to have a sequenced follow-on from Hinkley Point in order to be able to make these savings. And they've always talked about end of 2021, early 22 being sort of optimum start date for Sizewell C on that basis. But of course, coronavirus, you know, will have had an impact at Hinkley Point. They did have to scale back their workforce, admittedly not for that long. We don't know what long-term impact that will have on the schedule. Julia Pike from EDF said yesterday that EDF had hit its latest target a few days ahead of schedule, if you can sort of overlook the many years ago that they promised we'd be cooking our Christmas turkeys with it in 2017. But we also heard that EDF think that they've underestimated the number of workers they need to finish Hinkley Point, and we're in discussion with the local authorities down in Somerset about what they were going to do about that, whether that meant, you know, going to 24-hour working or some other form, some other arrangement which would enable them to bring in more people. We don't yet know what that means. Will it mean that they need more time to finish the project? It certainly mean they probably need to spend more money paying more people to work on it. So the question of how the sequencing of Hinkley and Sizewell is working right now is to be honest, a little bit fuzzier than it was previously because of all these other things that have got in the way. Anne has joined the course. She's saying she's been meeting with Suffolk County Council Highways regarding Wickham Market highway mitigation measures, which they hope EDF will be offering. I think that's a comment rather than a question, but it just reiterates just, you know, how widespread the impacts of Sizewell C are going to be. Anybody who uses the A12 between Ipswich and further afield and Lowestoft is going to feel the impacts of it. And there are many, many communities who have you know, very, very specific impacts that will affect them more substantially than other things. And what we would like to be able to do in the coming weeks is we're working with our friends at the Anglian Energy Planning Alliance to bring together representatives of town and parish councils and talk about ways in which we can share information, because there's obviously going to be a huge amount of work assessing EDF's application. And I think we all need to work together really to sort of share the burden and to make sure we coordinate our efforts so that we can make the best possible response. So I think that might be, we might have a pause in the questions for now, and it's probably a good time to stop anyway, because we've been going for about 40 minutes. We wanted to say thank you. We just felt it was incredibly important at this point to communicate with you and to give you some pointers about what's going to happen next. But most importantly, to say, you know, we certainly aren't done yet. This may be a step along the road that we didn't want to happen, but we've got lots of energy and ideas and firepower and support up our sleeves, and we're certainly going to make our very, very best efforts to stop Sizewell C. So with thanks from me, and thanks from Paul and Charles. And
yes, thank you very much.
If you've got any more questions, just add them to the comments box, and we'll take a look through a little bit later and answer them in writing. But thank you so much if you've been watching. Well, you've obviously been watching if you can hear me say this. Thank you so much, and thank you for your support. It means everything to us.